Hello and welcome to episode 123 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Andrew Sykes, founder of Habits at Work, professor of executive education at the Kellogg School of Management, author, leadership expert, and global speaker who has spent his career helping leaders build trust, communicate with influence, and create lasting impact. In this episode, Andrew and I explore what truly separates great communicators from everyone else. We discuss why trust is the foundation of effective communication, why listening goes far beyond simply hearing words, and how storytelling helps leaders inspire action rather than simply share information. Whether you're leading a team, presenting ideas, managing relationships, or simply trying to become a better communicator, this conversation is packed with practical insights you can apply immediately. Let's dive in. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited for the conversation. It's a subject we both care about deeply.
Absolutely. It is a fascinating subject, impacts every facet of our lives. So really looking forward to the conversation. Before we get into it, if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about you, your career background, and the great work that you're doing today.
Yeah, well, as you can tell from my accent, I was born in South Africa, and the beginning part of my career was as a qualified actuary. If you don't know what that is, we study statistics, specifically what kills people and what makes them sick. So you may imagine that my early part of my career was all about the data and the numbers. But as a young person, I started a business at age 21, and what I very quickly discovered is having all the answers is not the best answer. Having all the answers and an ability to communicate them in a way that other people can understand them, make meaning from them, take action from them, that's the real power habit, as I like to describe it, not a soft skill at all. And since that time, I've lived and worked on eight cities around the world on 6 continents. I now live in Chicago running Habits at Work and teaching at the Kellogg School of Management. I'm a professor of executive education there. Teaching is another form of communication. So all things to do with one human using their voice to speak their or other people's future into existence, which is how I think about communications.
That is quite a journey. A lot of different activities in there, different things in there, all over the world. And the common thread is communication. And as you mentioned, the magic really happens when you have somebody that, say, understands the technical component of it or understands the data component of it, and they can help people understand that through their communication. And so often we see that where people are on either end, where they're great communicators, but maybe they don't know the technical aspect of it, or they're very strong technicians, and goodness, for the life of them, they could not explain what they do to somebody else. So when you marry the two, that's where you really do see results, and ultimately you get that impactful communication.
Absolutely.
So as you think about it, when you hear that someone is a great communicator, or they're described as having very strong communication skills, what's the image that pops into your mind?
The image is someone that you're looking at where you see words coming out of their mouth, and as a result, immediately the future changes because they use language to inspire the actions in other people from which everything that humanity has built is created. My view is when you look at all the species on the planet, what makes humans unique is we have built bridges and roads and cities and governments and countries, every one of which started as an idea, but was created in language, communicated through a group of people in a way that inspired them to take the matching actions that create the future. So I see someone speaking and quite literally the realities coming out of their mouth. The future is being created as they speak. And my favorite saying about communications is, the meaning of my communication is in the result. Especially when people say, well, Andrew, I said X, and then they went and did the other thing. And my response is, well, if you want to know what you actually meant when you spoke, look at how people act and look at how they respond. It doesn't matter what you think you meant to mean. What matters is what people took from it and did in response.
The intent very much falls by the wayside. It honestly, to some extent, almost doesn't matter what your intent was, because ultimately it really is, what did the people receive and how did they act upon that? And you mentioned great communicators ultimately inspire people to move to the action that they want them to do. So, what are some of the things that those great communicators are doing that is creating that inspiration, or that are moving the people to action?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, and some may or may not surprise listeners. I doubt they'll surprise you being an expert in this domain. I would say first and foremost, they have developed the skill to allow other people to trust them as a human in the milliseconds to minutes when they first meet them, rather than the months that it usually takes people. And they have practiced, polished, and perfected a high trust first impression. My view is the golden rule of communication is first we decide whom to trust, and that determines what we believe. Therefore, great communicators are primarily great at building trust. The second skill, it doesn't involve using words to a degree, but I believe the second most powerful communication skill is listening, which in a sense could happen without you saying a word. And not active listening. I'm on a soapbox about active listening being a trust eroding skill. My view is active listening is attending to what someone's saying, nodding along, making a show of the fact that you're listening. But if you're focused on what people are saying, you're missing what they mean to communicate, which is usually in the emotions below the words and the concerns below the emotions. So it's a much deeper, much more feeling first, verbal second skill. And then of course, once you've listened, and my view is why listening is so important, is no one wants to know your opinion about anything until they've had a chance to express themselves. So it's the skill that opens people up to be ready to listen to you. In a sense, asking great questions does the same job. It opens people up to listen to you. But I think the superpower of communication is the ability to wrap concepts, data, facts and figures, evidence, whatever you think will actually change someone's mind, into the Trojan horse of a story. That gift presented at the gate to the castle of someone's mind that they let in because we were suckers for a story, and then the facts and figures, like the proverbial soldiers, are released to do their mind-changing work. So, high trust first impressions, empathic listening, great storytelling.
Fantastic. Three core skills. And as you mentioned, with the trust, the listening, and the stories, a lot of times I think people are intimidated by using stories. But if you're listening to this, rewind 45 seconds and just the very brief example that you wove in there of the Trojan horse and the soldiers. Stories do not need to be these long, drawn out, complex things. Within a matter of seconds, you painted the picture of the impact that a story can have by using that very apt example of the Trojan horse. And when it comes to listening, there's levels of listening. As you mentioned, the general high level active listening. Yes, I'm nodding, I'm paying attention, I'm not looking at my phone. When that listening really moves to the next level and you demonstrate that you truly heard what they said, what their concerns are, what the underlying meaning is really where you can somewhat play it back and you check for that understanding. Andrew, so if I understand correctly, what I heard was what your feeling is, that one helps to kind of solidify the trust that you built immediately, and it signals to the person that you ultimately were paying attention and that you care about what they were saying.
Yeah, and you know that I often hear that saying, which I'm sure comes from well-meaning parents. You've got two ears and one mouth, use them in that proportion. I think that's spectacularly bad advice, because hearing is very different from listening. And we've all had that experience when we're hearing what someone's saying while we're distracted by our phones. They yell at us and say, "You're not listening to me." What they're really pointing to is we're not paying attention to them. And that's mostly visual and body all in on the conversation versus hearing with one ear.
And I been working to make it a practice that, especially at home, when my wife or my kids are talking to me, say if it's after work, maybe I'm on the couch, scrolling on my phone or watching TV, that when they come and are talking, it's, phone gets put down. I will shift my body position to face towards them, because that ultimately really signals I'm paying attention. I'm not just listening and yeah, okay, yeah, sure, yes, you can go do that. All these little things that you can do compound and have a big impact on your communication.
Absolutely.
Andrew, you mentioned that you, with your teaching, working in executive education. So as you think about executives at work today, what are some of the critical skills that they're needing in order to be successful and thrive at, say, a high level within their organization?
Yes. Well, we've mentioned three: the ability to build trust, but I would also say the partner to that is the ability to restore trust when it's been broken, even and especially when it wasn't your fault. And we often, rail against someone saying, but it was my predecessor who did this, not my fault. Well, it may not be your fault, but it probably still is your problem as a leader. And so being able to restore trust in a team, in the culture in which you operate, and take responsibility for what came before you is a superpower. Listening and asking questions, I think, are two really powerful habits. And just like active listening doesn't get the job done versus empathic listening, I think the mistake we make with questions is we think that questions are a tool to get answers. And of course they are. But if you see them more like a Swiss Army knife, and there are some questions that allow us to connect with someone at a very human level. There are some questions that signal that we're listening, like clarification questions. There are some questions that help people to change their perspectives. I call them exploration questions. And there are some questions that help people see what the next right action is, that makes it easy for them to get into action. And you start to see questions as a multi-pronged tool versus just the way I get answers. We've already mentioned storytelling. I would also say, and this may be a surprising one, the way that you run meetings is a leadership superpower, because most people tell me they have 30 or 40 meetings a week, and that maybe 5% of them are fabulous and couldn't have just been an email. So that skill of being able to open, guide, powerfully close, and get it all done in the 30 minutes you've got is, for me, the way to make business move at the speed of trust, as Covey said. It happens inside meetings.
The one thing that you mentioned there really jumped out to me. It's something that I've heard and I've said throughout my career, is that may not be my fault, but now it's my problem. And especially when it comes to rebuilding trust when you're in that situation. So, what's it look like in action? I'm a leader. Maybe I just inherited a team, and the team that I inherited, the culture is perhaps in rubble because of the past leader. So I'm in a situation, wasn't my fault, but it's absolutely my problem now, where I need to rebuild the trust of this team. So from a maybe a communication standpoint, what are some tips or strategies that if someone finds themselves in this situation that they could be thinking about?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take the lens out a little, zoom out, and just answer a more broad question, which is, how do I recommend people restore trust? And then we'll look at that particular position. And I have a point of view that may surprise people, which is, I believe we should never lead with an apology. Because if something happened that broke trust and we show up and we say, Scott, I'm so sorry that happened, what we usually follow it with is, here's my apology, then the excuse of why it happened. And that does two things for people. I like to say the difference between reasons and excuses is the following. I have reasons, everyone else has excuses. Meaning, when someone's telling me why they were late or got something wrong, it sounds to me like an excuse, but it sounds very reasonable to them. So I prefer this structure, which is you state what happened. Let's say I was late. And instead of saying I was late because of the traffic, I was late because someone in front of me rear-ended the car and there was a dust up, whatever that reason is, you simply state what happened. And then you ask, Scott, may I ask, what was the impact on you? Because if trust was broken, apologizing first means we're sorry that we feel bad, when the damage was actually what happened to you, and there's no way for me to know that other than by asking you. So if I say, what was the impact on you? And you could say, well, Andrew, I wasn't ready for my board meeting an hour later. I have now the option to say, I'll go and talk to the board, tell them it was my fault. I have the option to make an offer. Is there anything I can do to help you get prepared? Or at the very least, if I can't fix the mess I've created, I can say, Scott, I'm sorry for the impact of leaving you unprepared for the board meeting. And I think when someone's broken our trust, we're looking for them to take responsibility for the impact on us from our point of view. And so to your example, as a leader, I would avoid saying, I know the previous guy or gal did all X, it wasn't me, let's start with a clean slate. I don't think that works. I would rather say, here's the situation as I see it. There have been multiple breaks of trust, some before I arrived, some under my watch. But my opportunity, not my responsibility, my opportunity is to understand what the impact has been on you, my team. And I know it may be awkward to share, but you can count on me to listen with empathy, to fix what I can and to tell you what I can't, and then attend to building trust over time. And when trust is broken, people don't necessarily trust you to tell you how they feel, so it requires empathy, patience, and a demonstration that you really can be counted on to take what they share with you and act on it. So I'm not sure you can restore trust in an instant. People want to see you take responsibility and then fix the damage, and then they'll give you more rope to hang yourself with or to bind you together.
The benefit of taking that approach is that you really get to the core of one, what went wrong, two, how they felt about it. And from a leader perspective, knowing that enables you to then think about how I'm going to approach things, because I could come in as a new leader, understanding that maybe the culture was broken here, or things went wrong, and thinking that the way that I'm going to do that is just going to automatically be better. And for them, it could be more of the same. And I won't know that if I don't take the time to actually ask what went wrong, what was the impact, how did it make you feel, or whatever it may be. By taking the time with that approach to understand versus just coming in and assuming that the way that I'm going to do things is magically going to be better is massive.
Yeah. And to that point, the research from Edelman's Trust Barometer and other research I've seen suggests that leaders are trusted less than strangers. And if that's true, as you get promoted, you could say to yourself, well, I'm a leader who clearly someone trusted to give me this position, and you're right. But the moment that happens, people that worked with you before, that now report to you, or people that now report to you if it's a new job, there's a level of distrust in leadership across the board. Thanks often to people who came before us who weren't that trustworthy, but we're stuck with the reputation. And being indignant and saying, well, I'm a new leader for a new day, you should trust me, is delusional. I think the only humble thing to say is, as a leader, I am not trusted as a default, and there are things I can do about it to climb out of a trust hole that otherwise I don't notice I've been put into.
Yeah, leadership does not come with trust built in. It's a great frame to look through, and that can guide some of your actions, especially as you're stepping into a new role. So shifting gears a little bit, Andrew, we've been talking a lot about others. If we talk about you for a second, and if I were to say, ask someone close to you, what has been the key communication skill that has helped Andrew get to where he is today? What would they share with me?
I'm confident they would say storytelling. And the reason is, if they knew me long enough, they would have seen me earlier in my career. I wish I could say further back in time than recent, but certainly a decade ago as a professional speaker, I was still lecturing people. Because I believe that the way to change someone's mind is to give them evidence. And as a fact-based person, that felt natural. And then I hired my first professional speaking coach, who very shortly re-educated me And since I've done the research, Annette Simmons says, facts and figures don't change minds, they only harden pre-existing opinions. Because people fight back, they argue back, they dismiss them as fake facts or fake news, but stories change minds. And so I've spent the last decade honing my skill as a storyteller, which I think is an essential leadership power habit. And it has transformed my life, my speaking, my teaching, my business. I love telling stories now. And to your comment earlier, we tend to think of stories as sort of the fluff around the important business stuff. I think stories are everything, because humans are storytelling apes. We're narrative creatures. If you don't wrap it in a story, expect someone to argue back, stall their progress, or at worst, tell you to go and pound sand because no one likes being told what to do. But stories allow other people to see for themselves what to do. And there's a humility that comes with it. You know, we like taking credit for our work. If you give someone your idea, you get credit, unless you've got a terrible boss. But when you tell a story, I've seen time and time again that other people listen to it, like when they go to a movie, they learn from it, and they come out of the experience convinced it was their own insight and their own idea. So storytellers, I think, need to also be humble enough to know, I'm going to give away my idea, packaged in this Trojan horse of a story, and it's okay because what I'm committed to is the idea getting oxygen, not me getting credit.
It's a small nuance, but you go from using data to try to convince someone. And as you mentioned, it typically doesn't work. It just hardens those pre-existing opinions and views that they have, versus stories where you are enabling them to draw their own conclusion. They may not have experienced the exact same thing that you're sharing with your story, but likely throughout their life, they've experienced something similar where they connect the dots, the light goes off, and then, as you mentioned, they are seen as coming to that conclusion and making that decision. And it's a lot easier to get somebody to buy in when they feel that they've made the decision versus you're trying to, in essence, convince them and fight them along the way.
Yeah, and you're right. We all have our own unique experiences and stories. But as humanity, we share a common set of emotions. And so your story and mine are different. But if your story can evoke the feeling in me that you had during your experience, we're suddenly connected at a very human level. And I love that the neuroscience shows stories, especially character-driven stories, have both dopamine and oxytocin released in the brain. The molecule of motivation, so stories get people to take action, and the molecule of trust. We trust and want to collaborate with people who share stories. So why wouldn't you get good at that job as a leader? And when people say, well, what is leadership? Every professor where I teach has a different definition. My own one is, leaders have the ability to tell a story about a future in a way that lands for other people as an opportunity for personal transformation. And so they're excited, they lean in, they say, how can I help? How can I be on this team? Versus most people, which is like, I'll do what you pay me for, nothing more, nothing less. I'll wait for you to tell me what to do. And then maybe I won't do it anyway because I hate being told what to do. So leadership is the beautiful opportunity to create the future through storytelling.
And when used correctly, stories will make those connections. And I grew up playing sports. I have two kids that are very active in sports. So I use a lot of sports related stories. And I realized that my audience, not everyone has played sports or experienced it, but on some level, most people have experienced something where they worked hard for something and they fell up short and they were disappointed. Or somebody tried to provide them feedback in a moment where they were tired, angry, frustrated, and that feedback was not going to be helpful, or they received feedback just at the right time where it did help them and have an impact. So even though they've never played sports, they've likely experienced something that has related to sports. That's why I said, when done well, stories start to become universal.
Yes, and coming from South Africa, where Nelson Mandela was the Peace Prize recipient and the president, if you ever watched that movie Invictus, it was the beginning of what really transformed a country through the game of rugby. Mandela said, sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It can unite people in a way that little else does. It went on, but that's the essential theme. And I think I usually say to people, be careful of sports metaphors because not everyone knows the game and it's stereotypically a male thing to do. But stories about your participation in a sport, the challenges that come from it, those are universal. We've all played games as kids, if not as adults, and we can relate. It's why I challenge people to share personal stories at business. You know, everyone had a childhood. Most people have a mom and dad they can remember. Most people have funny things that have happened to them when we were dumb kids. And the more you share about your life, the more people say, well, I guess we're more similar than I thought. And similarity is a very close cousin to trustworthiness.
Andrew, we've talked a lot about stories and listening, establishing trust, rebuilding trust, all these things that go into an effective communication style. As you think about your communication style and the way that you communicate, who's been someone from throughout your life or your career that has had an impact on them? Maybe it's just something that you've picked up from them. You saw it in action with them and maybe you tweaked it a little bit, made it your own, but it's part of your communication tool belt now.
Yes. I don't know where I found this, and it'll date me, but when I lived in South Africa, I found this cassette tape of motivational speakers. It had like Zig Ziglar and other names you would recognize, but one of them was Les Brown. And I've since watched almost everything I can of his, and he is one of those speakers and storytellers that for me is the gold standard. I mean, he's got a voice like melted chocolate. He's got this big laugh that's very infectious. He's a quote machine. And I happen to think quotes aren't just, tacky things you put on a block of wood up in your kitchen. They're like mind worms, tiny little stories that can help inspire us, remind us what we're up to, get us back on track when we fail. So I'm very impressed with people who can just quote chapter and verse from multiple different sources as if it's just part of their natural language. So he's one for sure.
And when it comes to presentations, I think quotes sometimes do get a little bit of a bad rap, but to me, quotes are, as you said, they're mini stories. If you can find the right quote that makes the connection to what you're talking about, what you want your audience to understand, that a simile, a metaphor, a quote, and a real life story, a anecdotal story, all of those different things play into kind of your broader narrative. So if I understand what's my big story, what's my narrative that I'm trying to portray here, then what are all the little things that are going to feed up to that? Maybe it is a bigger, broader story. Maybe it's a quick quip. Maybe it is some sort of a quote. All those things play into it. And just, it takes time, just like anything. It takes practice. It takes thought to go into it. You start to incorporate then and just you build those muscles and it starts to come a little bit more naturally.
Yeah. And, we're in an attention deficit economy. Stories help us pay attention, so remember things. But for me, a quote is often a beautiful way of tying a ribbon on the moral of your story in a way that might be alliterative or poetic, but therefore easy to remember. And knowing that 95% of what we hear every day is in one ear and out the other ear, anything you can do to have people remember the point of your story, if not the story, will help you as a communicator and a leader.
And that's a great segue. And speaking of tying a ribbon on things, as we wrap up our conversation today, what piece of closing advice would you have for folks listening to this, just around the importance of the skills we talked about today and the impact that they can have on their work life, their personal life, really all aspects of their life?
Yeah. Especially in an age of AI, where many technical skills may be taken over or completely agentically completed. If I were 21 today, I would want someone to sit down with me and say, Andrew, the only skills that are likely to survive are your interpersonal communication, trust building, and influencing skills. So whether you're an engineer, a dentist, or any other profession, yes, and go to work like your life depends on it, because it just might actually, attending to the skills of trust building and communication. And of course, call Scott. He'll tell you how.
Exactly. I appreciate that. Andrew, if folks want to connect with you, learn more about the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that? And I'll make sure I include it in the show notes.
Thank you very much. I'm active on LinkedIn, so I would love people to connect with me or follow along on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there. My personal email address is linked to my company, Habits at Work, and my email is andrew@habitsatwork.com. It's all spelled out, of course, HABITSATWORK. And again, I'm very open as a communicator. I want people to reach out because I'm interested in having the conversation. I always am amazed by CEOs of businesses who don't make their cell phone and email available. Why would you do that when speaking to potential customers and people you can learn from on a podcast is the source of so much joy, but also how we transform our businesses?
I'll absolutely put those in the show notes. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed our conversation.
It's been my privilege. Thank you for having me.
Special thanks again to Andrew Sykes for joining me and sharing so many practical insights on communication, leadership, trust, and storytelling. One of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is that communication isn't simply about delivering information. It's about creating understanding, building trust, and inspiring people to take action. As Andrew shared, facts alone rarely change minds. Stories, empathy, trust, and genuine listening create the conditions where people are willing to see things differently. Be sure to subscribe to Communicast so you don't miss future conversations with communication experts, business leaders, and coaches who are helping redefine what great communication looks like. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating or review. It helps others discover the show and supports our growing community. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.